Good day, everyone, especially to you, Madam. So today, I am going to discuss about the topic process documentation. So here is the slides of my report. Okay, so process documentation. So let's dive deeper into what process documentation is and why you should care. What is process documentation? Process documentation examples. Benefits of process documentation. How to create process documentation. Process documentation, a template, and process documentation people will actually read. So let's start with what is process documentation. So any idea? Okay, so process documentation is a step-by-step description of how to execute a process from start to finish. Processes can be documented in the form of policies, checklists, tutorials, forms, screenshots, and so on. So anything that describes how a process should be executed. Process documentation is also a detailed description of how to execute a process. It outlines the exact steps needed to complete a task from start to finish. Here is the process documentation examples. A common process documentation example is a standard operating procedure or SOP document. Here's an SOP example created in Nuclino. Nuclino is a unified workplace where you can collaborate on internal documentation, manage projects, onboard new employees, take meetings minutes, collaborate on documents, and bring all your teams together. So here is the standard operating procedure that created in Nuclino. So other examples of business processes that are typically documented included performance review, customer complaint resolution, process equipment inspection, and maintenance procedures, service delivery process, billing and collections process, and new employee onboarding. How to create a process document. So here are some steps in creating process document. So first, scope information. Second, define boundaries. Third, determine input and outputs. Fourth, identify steps. Fifth, connect with stakeholders. Sixth, outline your process. 7, note exceptions. And 8, test the process. So let's start with scope the initial process. In the first step, the project manager scopes the initial information and creates a brief description based on goals, timeline, and priority. The second one, define process boundaries. So, the outline where the process fits into various teams by identifying the different tasks each team accomplishes. So, consider where the process starts and ends and who is affected by it. The third one is determine process inputs and outputs. The third steps involves identifying both the inputs and outputs. Process inputs are the resources needed to complete its process. Process outputs are what you wish to achieve at the end of a process. So you can determine outputs by looking at your initial project objectives and selecting specific measurable indicators. For example, if your objective is to spend less time on busy work, then one of your output might be automate task reminders. And the fourth one, identify process steps. So now you've gathered the necessary information through the process inputs and outputs. It's time to break the process plan down into small pieces. This can be done independently in a brainstorming session. The fifth one is connect with project stakeholders. So this provides clarity and streamlines communication. Once the steps has been laid out, it is to break each task down and assign out who is responsible for them. It's a good idea to include detailed information for each task in the document. So like deliverables and timeline. If you need to provide additional task background or context for more complex subject or project, consider meeting with the team or direct them to the information they need. So let's move on to the 6th, which is construct a process flow chart. So as you can see, Each step has a corresponding input and output. Visualizing these steps in a flowchart makes it easy to see which resources and outcomes you can expect. You can also add swim lanes to your diagrams to categorize who is assigned to which task. This can be particularly helpful for complex processes. While each process will look slightly different, it's important that you connect your steps in order and provide the most important information upfront. The seventh one, note process flow exemptions. So these exemptions come from the fact that not every flow will follow the exact same path. For example, an exemption to the above workflow might be that some tasks don't need a review depending on the complexity of the work. In that case, you'll want to note which scenarios don't require approval. You should also include the steps your team should take to address these exemptions. And the last one is test the process. So the final step in the process documentation life cycle is testing the process to ensure it's working. While testing, identify where issues arise or where risks are impossible or possible and correct those in real time. Let's move on to the benefits of process documentation. So, first, eliminates errors, reduces busy work, streamlines resource allocation, and enhances communication. So, eliminate errors. Business process documentation prevents errors from proactively outlining each step of the process. By proactively documenting your process, you eliminate the following. First, lack of communication. Without proper documentation, lack of communication can be distributed, which results in more work about work. Second, missed process steps. Without detailed steps, tasks may be confused or overlooked, resulting in an efficient process. The third one, unclear objectives and outputs. If they don't understand the purpose of particular process, team members may be unclear about deliverables or priority. The right process document reduces busy work and time spent on work about work, since information is presented upfront and paired with visuals. So, there are the common blocks that process documentation eliminates includes frequent meetings, duplicate work, and disorganized communication. Frequent meetings, a process document can detail the needed information that would otherwise require a meeting. Ineffective meetings waste time and can even increase confusion in select cases. Duplicate work, when tasks are organized correctly, the first time work is less likely to be duplicated. The last one is organized communication. Information stored in various locations can lead to disorganized communication. Enhances communication. Keeping communication in a shared tool can prevent future process issues. This helps by giving all stakeholders access to a shared sources of truth that can be viewed of any time. To a shared sources of truth can be viewed at any time. So, first, in and enhanced communication can help the following. So, first, work gets done correctly the first time around. Clear communication reduces the risk of confusion and low quality work. Second, create clear process knowledge. Communication can keep teams stay up to date with new processes. The third one, enhance process maps and standard operating procedures. Communication can clarify information and ensure the process maps and procedures align with the original process objectives. Streamlines resource allocation. A process document streamlines resource allocation by organizing information into clear steps and connecting them with the resources needed. This ensures the resources are used in the correct way. When teams know which resources to use, they can use them correctly and efficiently. Connected to the right steps by connecting resources to tasks, it's clear how and when they should be used. Produce the intended outcome. When resources are allocated properly, they can be used for their intended purpose. So, there are some reasons many companies cite and excuses for avoiding documentation are countless. Too much is changing right now, so you wouldn't want to spend valuable time documenting and standardizing things that might change in the near future. Procedures are constrictive, so you need to be flexible to be successful. Standardization would only stifle your ability to innovate. There is no time for this. So, it doesn't seem like a priority to document things that you might barely have time to complete in the first place. The fourth one, it's too corporate and bureaucratic. So, you want to keep a more informal, personal company culture and don't want to adopt what seems like a practice best suited for large corporations. So, documenting processes can help you achieve 5 key things. So, first, process optimization. So, identify bottlenecks and inefficiencies by documenting the exact process. You'll quickly see what happens you need to improve or get rid of. Process automation. So, process document help discover tasks that can be easily automated, saving time and resources. So, new employee training. Internal documentation helps new employees understand their job rules and familiarize themselves with the processes they'll be involved in. Company knowledge sharing and retention. This is the documentation preserve a record of processes known only to a few people specialized in doing them. Without it, when an employee leaves, any process knowledge lives with them. Lastly, operational consistency. So if you don't document a process, essentially it is being reinvented by someone every time it is repeated. So, process documentation template. It's important to keep your documentation consistent in style, format, and level of detail. Most companies use the same process documentation template for every workflow they document. Here is an example of what such template could look like. The example of process documentation. So, as we can see, here's the inside of the standards operation procedure has a purpose, scope, definitions or acronyms, procedures, and related resources. So, process documentation, people will actually read. So, as we can see, content publishing process. Here's the step-by-step guide on what to do when you are creating your document. Make documentation easy to access and search. One of the main goals of documentation is to share and manage knowledge. Make it easy to edit. Processes are dynamic. They change over time. Managers redistribute tasks. People join and leave, the company rules change. Be concise. Don't distract your readers with excessive amounts of information. Then invest in visual process mapping. So instead of literally describing every step of a business process, help the reader digest the information by presenting it in the form of diagram of or a flow chart. So that's all. Thank you and